Hi, I'm Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation. I'm joined by Sheldon Richmond, the foundation's vice president. This is the Libertarian Angle, the show that brings you the libertarian perspective on the burning issues of the day. Sheldon, one of the burning issues of the day right now is what's happening in Ferguson, Missouri. I think most people are aware of it. You got a black kid that's walking down the street. Cop stops him. Next thing we know, the kid has 6 bullet holes in him, and he's shot dead. And then you have this massive outrage among the black people in the community. And they see this as a grave wrongdoing, and they're angry about it. They hit the streets to demonstrate against what they perceive as a massive injustice, as well as what seems to be a cover-up by the police and the city to try to put a shield around what's going on here. And then all of a sudden they're met with this massive armed military force, or what seems to be an armed military force, and it's just the cops that are dressed up with military uniforms and gas masks and wielding machine guns. I mean, they look like an occupying army. And this seems to me to confirm what we libertarians have been saying for many, many years about the militarization of police and what the national security state, the Pentagon, the CIA have done to the local police by turning them effectively into soldiers, into occupying forces that view the citizens not as people who are exercising fundamental rights, protected rights, but as a enemy force that needs to be defended against. And it just confirms this police state environment in which we're now living. What do you think?
Well, I agree. This modeling of local police departments on the military is something that has been under watch for quite a while, particularly by some libertarians. Radley Balco and William Grigg are 2 examples, but Balco in his recent book, The Rise of the Warrior Cop, has been writing about this probably every day for years. We do know that the Department of Homeland Security makes it very easy for police departments, no matter what size, to get some of the most sophisticated military equipment, 50 caliber weapons, armored personnel carriers, things that are designed to protect against improvised explosive devices, which we haven't seen in urban areas or suburban areas. And yet these police came out, like you say, that first night, as if they were an occupying army, pointing guns at people who had not committed any violence of any kind, just sort of manhandling people. And it was this, it was a shock and awe. It's the shock and awe model, right? That the Bush administration, built into their doctrine. If you're going to go to war, you go overwhelmingly and scare the heck out of anybody on the other side. Well, this is what the police seem to be now modeled on. We have 100 SWAT raids a day that often end up in people dying, or certainly people's pets dying, and sometimes they're the wrong houses. A lot of this is fueled by the drug war, of course. So it is very disturbing. We don't know the facts in this in the actual shooting, but we can separate the shooting from what came afterwards. Obviously, anytime the police shoot somebody, especially an unarmed person, broad daylight in the middle of the street, it should get obviously the closest scrutiny, as much scrutiny as it would be that if a private individual shot a policeman, and the people need to be confident that that's actually going to happen, that this is going to be looked at without any sense of protecting, the men in blue and all that kind of thing. That's what will, minimize dangerous, violent demonstrations. Most people are not committing violence in Ferguson. In fact, demonstrators are trying to get the ones that are committing violence, like looting, to not do that. So this is not like this whole city has suddenly become one massive environment of violence. But there is obviously something here that has to be looked at, and the people need to be reassured that it's actually being looked at objectively.
Yeah, we don't really know what's going on, and there has to be an investigation. The thing is that I get a sense of unease, though, that there seemed to be this immediate knee-jerk rallying around the police and protecting the police, instead of treating this as as somebody who has just killed another person and needs to be investigated as a murder or other kind of criminal wrongdoing, manslaughter. I mean, the guy ends up with 6 bullet holes in him, and he was unarmed. I think that's undisputed. And I get the sense that there's more of a knee-jerk sense of, hey, let's cover up and let's rally around the cops here. I think they need to bring in a special prosecutor on something like this. You certainly can't count on the police force. I read somewhere the mayor used to work for the police department, and you can't expect the police in that city and the prosecutors to play a fair game. Certainly there would be a sense of an appearance of impropriety. I say bring in an outside prosecutor, outside investigators, and if it looks like this guy wrongfully killed this young man, then prosecute him to the full extent of the law. And then on this warrior cop business, I'm glad you mentioned Radley Balco's book. If people haven't heard about this book, we highly recommend it. It's called The Rise of the Warrior Cop. It's fantastic. And Balco's been the leading figure, the leading libertarian, warning about this is what's going on in America. You know, we often talk as libertarians about the police state that America has become. Sheldon, you and I have written about the borderlands and the southern border where you got these Soviet-style checkpoints where you never even go into Mexico, and you've got to stop at these checkpoints and show your papers. In my hometown of Laredo, people traveling from Laredo north, most of whom are Mexican Americans, have to carry identification papers to show that they're American citizens, even though they never enter Mexico. But we've also talked about how they're militarizing the police, that you've got the national security state apparatus that needs to get rid of outdated weapons, and they used to give them to tyrannical regimes in third world countries, which was bad enough. But now they said, oh, let's just give all our surplusage to the police departments, and so that they can become militarized like us. They can start behaving like soldiers. And, well, cops are not supposed to be soldiers. Cops are supposed to be your friend. They're supposed to be on your side, protecting you from murderers and thieves and rapists. And yet now that they have this military mindset that the Pentagon, the CIA have inculcated in their minds, they look at citizens as the enemy. So when these people are obviously angry, and they have a reason to be angry, instead of sympathizing with them and saying, hey, we understand why you guys are angry and we're investigating this thing, instead they line up in these, ninja type outfits with machine guns and, a full occupation. You now know, by looking at Ferguson, you now know what it's like to live in Iraq or in Afghanistan, where you've got a foreign occupying army, and people resent this. They resent it in Iraq and Afghanistan. They also resent it in Ferguson. And from what I can tell, a lot of Americans are just shocked over this type of thing. This is the Sovietization of America, Sheldon. And I'm sure there's going to be people calling for reform of the police department and maybe a civil rights prosecution. We got to put this thing in the much larger perspective. This is the militarization of society that has come with the national security state apparatus, the old Cold War and all this. That's the root of the problem. You combine that with the drug war, combine that with abusive cops that target blacks and Latinos, and this is where America is now left. This is about as far from a free society as one can ever get.
Yeah, I agree. It's really disturbing. This particular incident of the shooting, we can distinguish the shooting from the public reaction and the problems that followed the show of force, the show of military force by the police after that. The shooting itself, needs to be fairly investigated, and I agree with you that maybe they should bring someone in from outside who won't be seen as tainted by the city administration. We do know, and the family has acknowledged this, that Michael Brown, the 18-year-old victim in this, just before the incident had been in a convenience store, and there's video which the family attorney says, just show Michael Brown intimidating a much smaller either clerk or owner or manager, and taking a handful of packets of cigars, which they say were worth $50, and pushing the guy aside and then leaving. So it's considered a strong-armed robbery. It wasn't even shoplifting because it wasn't sort of discreet discreetly sticking some goods in your shirt and walking quietly out. It's an actual confrontation. The first word out from the city, or I'm not sure where this originated, was that the policeman who then approached, while in a car, approached Michael Brown walking down the street with a friend, didn't know that Brown was a suspect in this. And that may or may not be the case. I mean, that's what the investigation, one of the things that I'll have to bring out. Of course, if Brown was the person in the store, and like I said, his family's attorney say it is him, he certainly is conscious of that event and would have every reason to think the policeman was approaching him over that. So you do have the potential for a nasty incident. But again, that doesn't tell us that in no way tells us that the killing is justified. Even if there was a struggle for the gun, it could still be that firing 6 shots into Brown was way excessive force and actual homicide, way beyond what was needed to subdue him. So whatever happened in that store does not in any way clear the policeman. That all needs to come out. The city, if they want to calm down the people of the city, the city government, the police will need, and the prosecutor's office and the state attorney general, all these people are going to need to assure people that an objective and fair investigation into the shooting is being done, and there's no sense of what you referred to, that there's a rallying around, encircling the policeman to protect him. At first, they didn't want to give out the name. They were saying that was for his protection, and you can kind of see that too. Now the name is out there, and he's not on the street. He's taken off, he's put on administrative duty. But the city's going to need to bend over backwards to show that they are fairly investigating this, and there's not going to be any special consideration because this shooter was a policeman.
Well, especially given the long history of police abuse against blacks and Latinos, and from what I understand, at least one version of the story is that this kid's walking down the middle of the street with a friend, and the cop stops and says, "Get off the street," issuing his orders, and it's just this mindset that exists where the cops feel like they're the bosses, just generally across American society. And this is especially true with respect to minorities. And we bring up the drug war in this context. I mean, the drug war has been the greatest thing for bigoted cops ever, because it lets them do their abuse of racial minorities all within the legitimacy of the drug war. That, hey, I'm just checking drugs when I stop this guy to search him, pat him down. I'm just saw some wad in the back of his pocket. I thought it was marijuana. I mean, all the drug war nonsense to abuse people of color. And it's gone on for decades, and we libertarians have pointed that out. When really the ideal is that we, the citizens, are the bosses. This is what they have forgotten. Cops all across the land. We're the bosses. We're the citizens. They are the servants. Their attitude is that they're in charge. They're the bosses, and we're the servants. And the best example of how this ideal is supposed to work, I think one of the best examples is out of the Bible, where St. Paul is being abused and harassed by soldiers who I think may have been serving in the function of cops. And all of a sudden somebody mentions, hey, he's a citizen. He's a Roman citizen. And boy, they all backed off. It was like, oh, wow, a citizen. You're not supposed to touch a citizen, because a citizen holds an exalted position. And the servants, the bureaucrats, recognize that. That's been totally lost in the last several decades. That, being a citizen is no big deal. The cops don't care. They're the bosses. And they treat everybody like this, like scum. But especially blacks and Latinos, they treat them horribly abusively, and the drug war gives them that ability. And now that you've got this rise of the warrior cop, as Radley Balco says, the situation is more combustible, because you've got people demonstrating, exercising fundamental rights, saying, hey, we don't like what happened here. Regardless of what happened, maybe the cop will turn out to be justified in what he did. But people have a right to protest and seek redress of grievances, petition the government, and it's the duty of government to protect the exercise of these rights. You don't see that at all. All you see the police lining up And they're looking at this as an occupying force, the same way as if they were in Fallujah, and perceiving the citizenry as a massive threat to the, like maybe they're concerned about an overthrow of the government or something like that. But they're viewing them like insurgents or enemies, a threat, rather than as citizens exercising fundamental rights.
Yeah, I don't know about Rome, but I think at least in the Anglo and American world, I don't think the police were always looked on so benignly, or the police treated citizens like exalted members of the community. Of course, we know that in police departments beat confessions out of people, not just in the South, or maybe things are even more aggravated, but certainly in the North as well. We know that there are certain Supreme Court cases that came along I guess beginning in the 60s, which finally started to realize this was outrageous. And you get Miranda and these other cases coming along, which try to remind the police, hey, you're not supposed to beat up on people. You have to, treat them as if they're innocent until they're proven guilty. So, and I think people for a long time, when they saw a policeman in their rearview mirror or were walking along the street and saw a policeman, immediately did a quick survey of their own conduct to make sure they weren't doing anything that would bring them to the attention of the cops. So I think there was, I think Andy of Mayberry was probably, more legend with maybe a few exceptions than fact. One thing that bothers me is that, and even I think this goes back to before this outright militarization, where the Department of Homeland Security is making available to police forces of all sizes, really heavy duty equipment that was used in Iraq and Afghanistan. Before that, I think the police at one time considered themselves civilians. Now they don't consider themselves civilians anymore. They put themselves in the class with the military. So it's them and all the military versus the civilians. I don't think it was always seen that way. I think the civilian used to refer to any non-military, which would have included the civilian police force. And so I think there's been a change of attitude that even predates 9/11 and Homeland Security, where they started, really equipping them in a pretty menacing way. The other thing is, I don't know what the numbers are on this, but I have a feeling the police departments are increasingly staffed by veterans of Iraq and Afghanistan. And if that's the case, you have people coming back with a soldier's mentality, now playing the role of policemen, and those were not supposed to be the same roles, as you've said. Just like people criticize using the military for policing functions in places like Afghanistan, the reverse is true. That the soldiers aren't well suited to engage in the policing function if that's just supposed to be the peace officer's role. There's that old phrase, peace officer. I don't think policemen see themselves as police officers anymore. I think they see themselves as occupiers.
I agree with you. I mean, they look at themselves as military machines, soldiers, and so forth, and they identify with the CIA, where, let's face it, the CIA has a lot of its assets in local police departments and as military units. So you see this concept that we libertarians have been talking about for decades, about the increasing police state that America is becoming. And you see this manifestation right there in Ferguson. This is what's happened, and that's why it's so important that we libertarians continue to place things in the larger context. This isn't just a matter of civil rights. It's not just a matter of reining in the police department. This problem goes much deeper. And in my opinion, it goes to the entire national security state apparatus that was grafted onto our governmental system after World War II, that increasingly militarized America with the Cold War, all the dark side practices, the torture, the assassinations, and then now the militarization of the local and police departments, the drug war. It all fits in this whole overall apparatus, so that if people want to do something about this, to me, you got to pull the weed out by its root. You got to analyze this thing in the much larger context. You can't just say, oh, well, if we reform the police department in Ferguson, Missouri, all the problems are gone. The problems are much deeper than this, because this extends all across the country. And you've got the militarization of America. And a lot of people think that's a good thing. Praise the troops. Boy, everybody's becoming militarized. Well, we could see when the Soviet Union had this type of thing that it was bad, but somehow there's this conception that if American soldiers and troops and cops are wearing American flags on their sleeves, that now it's okay. Well, it's not okay. It's the principles that matters. The militarization of a society is a bad thing. And that's what I think the entire national security state apparatus has done to our country. And so we can't just question the local police department on this. We got to question what we've done to this country in terms of the overall governmental system we have.
It really does show the intersection of foreign policy, the militaristic foreign policy, and domestic matters. There's a definite spillover there. We also should mention these fusion centers, which were set up after 9/11, which bring about the coordination of so-called law enforcement at all levels, including the Department of Homeland Security. And we also know from disclosures by Edward Snowden that the NSA shares information with local police, but the local police have to hide that fact. They have to find some other pretext for, say, a search or a stop of an automobile, and not let on that the information came from the NSA. So they have to find out sort of a parallel case. This has been discussed, and it's obviously very disturbing, because if it was known that the particular piece of information was obtained by the NSA's just blanket wiretapping and surveillance, that evidence wouldn't be admissible in court because it was obtained, without a warrant, without probable cause. So the local police are told by the NSA to come up with another rationale. Don't say it came from us. Come up with a story that you developed this independently, so it will stand up in court, and then there's deniability on the part of the NSA. So there's very close coordination of what we're calling so-called law enforcement from at all levels. This should be very worrisome. It just shows you the infection that occurred, that spread after 9/11, that almost everything was permissible at that point. Why? Because the nation was under attack. It was an existential threat, the way it was described to us, and so forth. And so therefore, in the name of security and safety, virtually anything, and maybe I don't even need to use the word virtually, anything is permissible, because the alternative, the demise of the United States, I guess that's what the story implies, is unthinkable. So the government must be trusted and be allowed to do everything. And that brings us back to foreign policy. What brought about 9/11? I hate to go over stuff we've gone over before, but it's so intimately related. If we didn't have the policies that result in terrorism in the United States, then at least you don't have this excuse for the police to be armed to the teeth with tanks, basically, and automatic weapons and 50 caliber munitions and things like that sort. It all ties together.
Yeah, it really does. And one of the interesting parts of this is that whenever the Pentagon wants to establish control over a certain country, that what their long time strategy has been is to establish relationships with the military in that country by funneling money weaponry directly to the military, not going through the government itself, and then establishing training programs. And so you inculcate this sense of loyalty and camaraderie among the two militaries. We saw this in Chile. That was how they were, in large part, able to initiate the coup, the CIA and the Pentagon down there, by ingratiating themselves with the military, directly the military. We see it in Egypt. And I think the same concept applies to these local police departments, that by furnishing them weaponry and training and being able to service the weaponry and helping them out and advising them and so forth, that all of a sudden you develop this relationship that exists between the military, the CIA, the police departments, that turns them the police departments away from what, like you say, the peacekeeping idea that, hey, we're here to help the citizenry, protect them against murderers and thieves and so forth, that instead views itself as an occupying army and views the citizenry as an insurgent force, an enemy force, a potential force that's going to overthrow the government. And of course, you mentioned the war on terrorism. I bet you anything they're just chomping at the bits to come up with some way to tie this to the war on terrorism. Because there's another interesting twist here, Sheldon, that I wanted to bring up. Notice that the law is such that if it turns out that this cop really did shoot this kid in cold blood, that he's subject to being prosecuted for murder. I mean, I don't think anybody disputes that there's no immunity here for this killing if the cop really murdered this kid. Also, the family can sue him. Notice, however, that the national security state apparatus, when it does this type of thing, the courts have built this wall of immunity and impunity around the CIA and around the Pentagon. Now, I'm currently writing in our publication Future of Freedom about the execution of Charles Horman and Frank Tarugi, 2 Americans in Chile, that the U.S. national security state participated in their murder and their execution. There has never been a murder charge brought precisely because it is perceived that when national security state officials do this type of thing, kill Americans as part of a national security state operation, they can't be prosecuted. And when Horman's widow, brought a lawsuit, the judiciary just threw her out and said, no, we're not going to let you take depositions. You don't have any evidence here. We're just going to throw you out of court. And so you've developed this sense, and I just add this in as a matter of interest here, that what's happening with a cop who might be held criminally and civilly liable, that type of liability doesn't exist at all for the national security state apparatus when they assassinate or execute an American. And I think that's part of this culture, that maybe the cops say, hey, if we're here protecting America, we're in charge, we can do whatever we want, just like the national security state apparatus can.
Yeah, it's like Obama said the week before last, I think, in an interview or in a talk, he said, yeah, we tortured some folks. That's exactly how he put it. But, we're not going to look back. We have to look ahead. So, in other words, the people that ordered and carried out the torture get away with it. They're safe. So it's exactly what you're saying. There is immunity. Thank goodness police don't have that immunity yet. Maybe it's heading that direction. After all, I can see somebody making the argument, how are these people supposed to operate on the streets and keep us safe if they have to be worried and have a lawyer with them at all times and look over their shoulder and wonder, how am I going to defend myself in court? On the surface, it sounds like, oh, yeah, I guess that's right. I guess we better give police immunity for anything they do, or else they'll be, handcuffed. They won't be able to do their job. And I think a lot of Americans might go for that kind of argument these days, given what they've swallowed in the recent past.
Yeah, well, it's a depressing subject. I mean, but I think the upside of this thing is that it has surfaced. And I think that the fact that these cops in Ferguson don't even realize what they were doing when they dressed up in their military garb, I think it's caught the attention of lots of Americans, not just in Ferguson. I think all across the country there are people saying, oh my gosh. Now, granted, there's going to be some saying, yeah, right on, man. I think we ought to militarize the whole police department in every city and town across the country. But I think there's a lot of Americans whose eyebrows are being raised and are now saying, hey, you libertarians had a point. Where has this country gone? Is this what it's come to? Effectively living like they did in the Soviet Union, or like they have in Afghanistan and Iraq under occupation. And because don't forget, it's not just the Ferguson Police Department. It's police departments all across this country with all of the tens of thousands of machine guns and armored personnel carriers and armored vehicles and tanks and so forth that the military has supplied them. It is not a positive direction. But the positive part of this is that people are breaking through, they're waking up, and they're seeing the danger, and they're seeing that this is not what America is supposed to be all about. This is not what the framers and the founding fathers intended for our country. And when people wake up, that's when there's opportunity for change. Anyway, that's the show for this week. Nice to be back with y'all. And this is the Libertarian Angle, and we'll see you next week.